Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Fairhurst from ETOA, and you're very welcome to join our expert webinar on sustainability. And we're joined by some excellent guests today. I'm going to wait for 30 seconds or so whilst our friends join us today. So meanwhile, I'm going to share a screen which tells you about an event happening in collaboration with ACTA at the end of November. So one moment while I change the screen. When the screen share comes back, we will start. So you can probably still hear me. So for those just joining, this is Tim Fairhurst from ETOA. We've got a holding slide up until the webinar on sustainability starts in another half minute or so. Thank you. Okay, I can see that we've got a good number of people who've already joined us. So you're in the right place. This is a joint webinar run by ETOA with our help from our friends at ACTA. And between us, we're going to be running an event at the end of November on the 23rd about sourcing sustainable tourism. So that's very much a practical, people who have sustainable product talking to people who are looking for sustainable product in Europe. But all of this takes place inside a much broader policy context. We know that there are all kinds of external forces which are insisting change on our industry. Some of those forces are the climate. Others are regulation and commercial pressures and all sorts of external challenges that we are continuing to manage, whether it's about inflation, all kinds of cost increases, staff availability. We know that operating in Europe is challenging, but we also know that one of the necessary things to happen over the next several years is for the tourism ecosystem to adapt to more sustainable practice. And that is going to be a collaboration between destinations and the supply chain on the one hand, and the demand coming from within Europe and also from outside Europe. That comes with its own challenges. Aviation is still very carbon heavy. So anyone who depends on tourism that comes by air needs to factor that into their strategy and maximize the benefit of those clients when they get to destination. Consumers are also driving the change, but not necessarily in the way we might think. And we're going to hear some reflections, particularly from Frank in that area. So the panel you've got today, and they'll be introducing themselves as they go along in order to save time. We've got voices from a voice from the European Commission, Laura, who's going to give us the broader EU policy context for the green transition and all the tools and the prospects of sort of regulatory coercion, but really what's the necessary move from now until 2030 so that Europe hits its Fit for 55 targets. So that's 55% reductions based on 1990 limits. Then we have Pascal, who is joining us from Switzerland Tourism. Switzerland Tourism has got a very holistic program to support sustainable practice, and we'll be learning about that. Then we'll move on to Kim, who's joining us from lovely Croatia, and she'll be giving us a very clear insight what it's like to be a client of people who are looking for sustainable product, and those people being operators around the world looking to buy the right thing in Croatia, but also working with the local supply chain on all aspects of sustainability. It might be climate, but there's lots of interest in social sustainability as well. And the formal discussions or formal presentations rather, will conclude with Frank from ANVR. So that's the Dutch Association of Travel Agents and Operators, who's going to give us the insight from particular market and share his reflections on what he's heard so far. So formal presentations will take up the first part of this session until about 11:30 or so. Then we'll have some questions among the panel. But if you, the audience, do have any questions yourselves, please feel free to submit them. I think it's a Q&A function You'll see that towards the bottom of your screen. So without further ado, I'm going to invite our speakers to present in the order I just introduced them. So Laura, over to you, please. Welcome.
Hello, hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Maanavilja. I'm the Deputy Head of Unit in the Communication and Stakeholders Unit of the Department for Climate Action at the European Commission in Brussels. So very pleased to be here with you today. So I would like to start with a very broad overview of where we are in terms of climate change and EU climate action and what's coming up on the policy side. So if that works, I would be happy to share my presentation, and I will start it right now. Can you see my screen?
We can see your screen, Laura. Thank you.
Voila. Okay. So what we're talking about in the policy context is, of course, the European Green Deal that you all probably are already familiar with to some extent. I'm going to talk mostly about the climate aspects, but this is, of course, a very broad strategy at the European level that looks not only on climate issues, but also on things like sustainable production and consumption, biodiversity protection, the energy transition, pollution reduction, and many other aspects. So we will touch on those, but focusing a lot on the climate policy developments. So what's the basis for our work at the European level? It is the scientific knowledge on what is happening to the Earth's climate and what we can do about it. This image is from the latest synthesis report of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change. So these are the big reports that summarize the state of climate science every few years. I think this is a very, very telling picture because here we can clearly see how global climate is warming, what the scenarios for the future are, and what it means for us as
Laura,
people.
just to interrupt, can you move the slide on? We're still looking at slide 1, so that might be a delay on my side.
This is strange. Let me see. Can you see it now?
Yes, we're now seeing the next slide.
Okay,
Thank
then
you.
I will change them in this way. Voila. So here you can see on the right-hand side, it is getting very red. Even with action taken, the Earth's climate is still warming. And if we take no action, or if we take too slow or too little action, it will only get worse. So this scientific basis is the basis for international action in terms of the big frameworks like the Paris Agreement agreed in 2015, which brings together almost all the world's countries. And this is also the basis for our action at the European level. So how we have translated this knowledge into goals and targets at the European level is about our ambition for the long term and for the slightly shorter term. I can see that there's something that's not working in here. So I'm not able to change my slides, strangely.
Okay.
But I will
we
do it again.
We were seeing the third slide there, Laura. If you want to give us another go, we'll see.
Yeah, I will try it again. And this is usually how it works with IT is you turn it off and you turn it back on, and magically it works.
Okay, I think you might manually have to. So we're looking at slide 3, EU climate ambition now.
Exactly. So our long-term climate ambition is for the EU to be climate neutral by 2050. We will reduce our emissions, and we will make sure that we also deal with those emissions that we cannot cut in the different sectors of the economy. This is not just a sort of vague ambition. This is actually part of European law. It's part of the European climate law that was adopted a couple of years ago. So the target for the climate neutrality for 2050 is an EU-wide obligation that we as as the EU, but also as all member states have to work towards. 2050 is on the one hand quite far away, on the other hand not so far away. To make sure that we really take the action that's needed to get there, we need milestones on the journey. The next milestone here is the 2030 target, which is that we need to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55%. Compared to the level in 1990, which is the baseline for a lot of EU climate policy. This sounds like a lot, and it is a lot. What's good to know is that we have already reduced our emissions by almost 30% from the 1990 levels. So what it means is that we have already done part of the journey, but what we need to know now is to do more and to do it quicker than what we have done in the past, knowing that in a way, a lot of the low-hanging fruit that have already been reaped, and we now need to tackle also the more difficult parts of emissions reduction. So this is clearly quite a challenge, but what our analysis shows is that it is ambitious but feasible. And actually a lot of what needs to be done is already in motion. In this graph, you can see the emission reductions that are needed from now to the midterm and the long term. And you can see that we are on a downward track, but we need to accelerate our efforts. What we are doing on climate policy at the moment is a comprehensive update of EU climate and energy legislation. We call it the Fit for 55 package. So to be able to reach our 2030 targets, we need to make sure that the individual pieces of legislation at the European level are fit for this purpose. And this is what we have focused on over the past couple of years. And this package has been agreed, adopted now, and will be entering into force. Some of these pieces of legislation are already in force and others will be soon. So this is basically about all sectors of the economy. It's about emissions trading that applies to industry, power sector, and also airlines. It's about road transport, for example, car emissions limits. It's about the infrastructure for electrifying transport. It's about what we do with energy production and use, about renewable energy, about energy efficiency, about taxation of energy. And it's also about how we take better care of our carbon sink at the EU level, how we deal with land use, how we deal with forestry and agriculture. So this is the big picture of many pieces of legislation that we're working on the emissions reduction front. The other piece of the puzzle, in addition to reducing the emissions, so taking care of the root cause of the problem, we know that climate change is already with us and we need to deal with the consequences. This is why at the EU level we have in place an EU adaptation strategy, and all EU member states have their own adaptation strategy or adaptation plan. So this is about what we can do now to be better prepared, to better deal with the impacts, and to adapt our society for a different kind of climate, for a different kind of world. Here are just a couple of images of what that can mean in practice. One image is about protection of our natural reserves and about our natural carbon sinks. The image with people planting trees is from Portugal. This is about making our cities less hot during heat waves, more green, which is good not only for the environment, but also for people living in the city. And the last picture is when adaptation and preparedness has not been a clear success, when we need to deal with the consequences like forest fires that we have seen increasingly affecting Europe as a whole, and also very importantly, your sector. One element that I wanted to flag as coming up is that next spring we will publish a first European climate risk assessment together with the European Environment Agency, which is a comprehensive picture of what are the climate risks that Europe needs to be prepared for, and how do they link with other risks that we are facing in terms of what's coming up for our society, for our economy. So this will be quite a broad picture of the impacts and what we will need to do about them. I will keep it very short. So the last element I wanted to flag is citizens. We now have the regulatory framework more or less defined at the European level. What needs to happen now is that this all needs to be brought into practice. This needs to happen on the ground. That means action at the member state level, action at the regional level, action at the very local level, action by businesses, and action by all the different players who are working on the ground in our communities. What we see when we ask European citizens what they think about climate change, this is a EU-wide survey that we do every 2 years. We see that the general level of awareness on climate change is very high. People are concerned, people are worried. We have seen that the geopolitical and economic developments over the past couple of years have had an effect. Climate change is, of course, not the only thing that people are worrying about. They are also worrying about their wallets. They are worrying about their jobs. They are worrying about their future. But on balance, we see that there's strong support from European citizens for this green transition to happen and for it to accelerate. So I will be very interested in the discussion today on how this awareness translates into action, both from businesses like your members, for example, but also from the consumers. We know that there's sometimes a gap between awareness and action, but I really think that there's good opportunities for different sectors to work together and to engage citizens in this as well, and make progress on making this transition happen in the real life on the ground around Europe. So this is my first overview, and looking forward to hearing from the others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Laura. And if you could pop out of the screen share, Pascal will get ready to present his. Thank you very much for such an interesting overview. And thinking about how implementation happens, Pascal, over to you. What's Switzerland been up to?
Thank you so much, and grüezi everybody. It is a beautiful fall morning here in Zurich, where I'm dialing in from. I've been with Switzerland Tourism for 10 years, and thank you for the opportunity to tell you a bit, hands-on what we are doing in Switzerland. So we have launched this program called Swisstainable. It's a combination of sustainability and Switzerland, and I would like to show you that we are convinced this is much more than a trend. We believe it is great to position our country, but it is also crucial because we want to protect our beautiful nature here in our country. What it does not mean is, should not mean less experience and less Switzerland when people visit our country, but it should actually be quite the contrary. It should mean more Switzerland. And what I can, tell you hands-on here also, what we would like guests to experience more is to enjoy nature up close and to really slow down, to consume regional food, regional wine, to experience our local culture in a genuine way. And I'm sure many other destinations do this as well, that guests stay longer in our country and really take more time to experience our beautiful country. Sustainability and Swisstainable, here we have our wheel, and I will just pick 2 or 3 topics. I mentioned the length of stay that we would like to increase, but besides the ecological sustainability, the economic sustainability is also very important. And we really believe that year-round tourism is crucial. I grew up in a rural area in Switzerland, and tourism provides many jobs there. So we really try to have tourism year-round, so people have jobs and employment during 12 months of the year. Now here to, not to get too technical, but we have 3 levels: committed, engaged, and leading. Committed means that you as a company commit to having sustainable practices. Engaged means you already have one certification or credential. And leading means that you already have several certifications and you're regularly being audited by third parties. And here you see a few examples of these credentials. There are currently 90 different certificates. So Swisstainable is not a certificate or a label, but the goal is really to give guests orientation to make it easier for them to find sustainable experiences if they are looking at coming to our country. Then this is not Switzerland tourism alone, of course. We, like in your other countries too, we have lots of hotels, we have restaurants, we have museums. So this is really a movement, a journey in our country where we work with many associations, also railway companies, cable cars, they're all very important, universities. And I mean, we have made good progress. It's not perfect, but I think we are on the right track. Currently, we have already over 2,300 companies that are part of this movement. So that's exciting, but we still have a long way to go. And our goal until the end of next year is 4,000 companies. Here you see an overview of the different levels. So light green is level 1, and then the darker green it gets is then engaged and leading. And here you have an overview across Switzerland, and I just checked a bit the participants. There is somebody dialing in from the Lake Lucerne region. Thank you very much. There's also a very beautiful region, and they're also very active when it comes to sustainability. What we try to do is we try to make it accessible. So currently the costs to participate in this program are very low. In other words, 0 Swiss francs or euros. And yeah, we really want to create this movement and enable suppliers to join this journey with us. Here are 3 examples of what this now could mean if you or guests of yours come to Switzerland. This is railway Stoss near Lake Lucerne. And what it does is on the way down, the brakes, they save energy that can be used afterwards at a hotel, the Stoss Lodge. So maybe you get to experience this one day. And then this is a very good example of the Lake Lucerne region. The lake cruise ships, they are level 2, they're engaged. So they do CO2 compensation for ticket sales. Many boats also have solar panels, and this is a good example. And then level 3 are the youth hostels. I've stayed in many of those as well. They're really nice. They have very good green building standards. They use heat pumps, and so they are level 3 and have several credentials, as you can see here. Yeah, we believe it's the right way to move forward. We have to do that. We have to take care of our nature, of our planet, but we also believe it makes sense from a business perspective. It creates jobs. Of course, you see my background, we like our trains. So whenever people come to Switzerland, we encourage them also to experience our country by public transportation or by electric cars. We have also the grand tour of Switzerland that you can do by electric car or by train. And how we work with the travel trade tour operators, here are just 2 quick examples. This is the travel corporation TTC, or this one is Quonitum Lare. We have with both a very good collaboration. And yeah, with this, I hand it to the next speaker, and I thank you for your interest.
Yeah, thank you. That is, you know, it's encouraging and it's informative, both useful things in a time when there's lots of bad news around. Thanks for sharing the detail on that. We're going to take the scale down a notch because and away from the public sector to people who are actually buying and selling. So, Tim, over to you. Please share your perspectives. So if you'd like to start screen sharing, I'll give the floor to you. That looks good. Thank you. So you're still muted, Kim. Apologies.
Sorry about that.
I can hear you loud and clear. Please go ahead. That's great.
Okay, sorry, just going back into slideshow. I'll try again. Hello, everybody. To those of you dialing in, my name's Kim Butigan, and I'm the Marketing and Project Manager at Adriatic DMC. As Tim said earlier, I'm dialing in from Croatia, specifically Dubrovnik. So sending you some sunshine if you don't have anywhere you are. So let's get started from our perspective as a private sector business. We're a relatively young and relatively small DMC operating across the Adriatic region, and we are serious about sustainability, having become Travel Life Partner in 2018 and Travel Life Certified in 2019. As part of our commitment to improving our business operations, we strive to do more than the minimum and maximise the positive impact that we have on our communities. So, allow me firstly to provide some context on why, one of the reasons why we take sustainability seriously at Adriatic DMC. As I mentioned, we're here in Dubrovnik, Croatia, which is where our headquarters are, which I'm confident that many of you will be familiar with. Dubrovnik's been lauded through the centuries as one of the most beautiful places on earth. And many of you, I'm sure, will have heard the quote from George Bernard Shaw that it is the pearl of the Adriatic. And if you've ever visited for yourself, I'm sure that you'll know that there's good reason why it receives the compliments that it does. However, writers of the present day have published pieces on the UNESCO protected city that are less enthusiastic. And that forms part of a bigger picture for why we take things so seriously. So while it's incredibly flattering that so many tourists want to visit Dubrovnik and Croatia, it brings with it many problems. And as a responsible DMC, it's important that we recognise and take positive action to reduce the negative impact. So let me provide some statistics here. And as you can see from these figures, the volume of visitors to Croatia compared to residents is significant. And when we look at Dubrovnik specifically, there are nearly 25 times more people visiting the city than there are residents through the course of a year. And this makes a sensitive and considered approach to operations a must and not a negotiable. So setting about on our journey to improve the impact of our operations, we were faced with and still are faced with hurdles. This part of Europe falls behind on education and awareness around key environmental issues, though entry to the European Union in 2012 has provided stimulation and incentive for the national government to address this, and we are seeing the effect of EU-backed programmes in waste management in particular. On a company level, it's a challenge to dedicate resources to improving the sustainability of operations, with pressure on staff to deliver on their key responsibilities already high. However, in my role as a project manager, I often have periods where my entire day is taken up with sustainability-focused tasks. I'm one of the lucky ones that I'm able to do that, and I'm aware that for many incoming DMCs, that is something that they don't feel that they have the capacity to do. Regulation and impact minimisation schemes are sometimes not enforced as they should, and we can attribute some of this to a problem in culture, both political and social. This can be incredibly frustrating and make it feel like the private sector is pushing forward while the public sector is just warming up for the game. But what's been the biggest contribution factor to the success of our sustainability-led initiatives? Well, without a doubt, it's been boardroom buy-in, and with the support of the executive team, developing and delivering our schemes has been a far smoother process. No hard sell is required. Quite simply, they get it. They understand the importance of sustainable operations for the viability of our destinations long term, and this attitude trickles down to the rest of the team and makes employee engagement in sustainability schemes far easier to secure. Some of our bread and butter schemes have included the procurement of insulated drink bottles that we then distributed amongst our licensed tour guides and tour leaders to reduce the use of single-use plastic on tours. We also procured cotton reusable bags, which would replace the plastic carrier bags our staff use on lunch breaks, pop into the shops, but also went out on the ground delivering operations in ports. But perhaps more importantly, we've had the full support of the board for projects like our Sustainable Shore Excursion Programme through SUSTOR, which will deliver new criteria and accreditation for excursions that operate in accordance with sustainable principles. We delivered training for our suppliers in June, which you can see a photo from here. And I completed an audit in August, and we are now waiting to agree on the final criteria on which all shore excursions will be assessed in the future. This programme, once completed, will significantly improve the visibility of sustainable travel products to our partners and have a far-reaching effect on operations across the board as our suppliers and the market adapts. Now, as the DMC, we feel a greater responsibility to our communities than most. What our legacy will be in 50 years' time is not only important to us, but it's on our mind in the decisions we make. That's why we've chosen to invest and develop in areas and destinations that have not previously benefited from tourism in Croatia, as the Adriatic coast has. Our pilot guide training program in Vukovar in 2020 is a great example of this. Upskilling a workforce and increasing the opportunities for employment, while at the same time improving the quality of a product available in a less developed destination. So what do we see as our outcomes on this sustainability journey so far? Well, the obvious is the decreased negative impact on the environment that we've achieved through our bread and butter schemes, as I refer to them. But actually what we've developed on what I would refer to as a higher level is a corporate culture of responsibility, which is nurtured within the company. We are responsible to one another as individuals, and we're responsible to our suppliers, to our partners who seek assurance from us that what we deliver is what we've promised. And we're also responsible towards the communities that we operate in, because they're not destinations at the end of the day, they are communities. Our programs have also upskilled workforce, which will have meaningful impact on socio and economic development in those regions. And those three things combined have actually led to us gaining a reputation as a responsible employer, but also as a top employer. And a byproduct of that is that we attract people who too are responsible and care about the environment in which they operate in. So it's a win-win for us. Thank you.
That's great. I'm very struck by, in a way, there's a lot of comparison between, you know, the holistic approach that Switzerland's taken, and from a commercial perspective, it's also a very holistic approach. Frank, I've got a feeling you're going to come up with some surprising news as well as interesting news when it comes to characterizing how the Dutch see tourism options and indeed what it is that the ANVR is doing to take a leadership position as they plot the path to a more sustainable future. So Frank, over to you.
In the meanwhile, I've been trying to share my screen. In the preparation, it wasn't working very well, but I hope that you can see my screen now without any strange pop-ups or anything like that.
Frank. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Tim. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you all for your previous contributions. My name is Frank. I work at ANVR. We are the Dutch travel trade organization, so I represent travel agents and tour operators that are aiming at the Dutch market, and I'm also the chairman of the sustainability committee within ECTA, the other organization Tim was referring to earlier. So ANVR is a travel trade organization. As I said, we represent companies, but because of the fact that our logo is considered to be a trademark, we're also considered to be a very strong consumer brand. I'm not a consumer organization, but I am a consumer brand. And we use that position to poll the people in the Netherlands, travelers in the Netherlands this year, about their vision of sustainability related to travel. I will come back to that. But what kind of summer did we have when it came to travel this year? There's just a few pictures of Greece and some pictures I collected from Italy. The forest fires in Greece, the incredible ice clumps that fell out of the air in Italy. And just last week I was in Spain. And just last weekend in Barcelona, it was 32 degrees. So the 1st of October, and it was 32 degrees. And in the south of Spain, it was 38 degrees. So you think that people are trying to understand that there is a problem with climate change, and it might be of influence of tourism and how we live tourism. Laura earlier told us that she did a research, and that 93% actually of the polled people considered climate change a serious problem. Well, apparently with my research, I just polled the other 7% because my outcome is very different than the outcome that Laura had. And it was very surprising. So we did research on travelers' attitudes towards sustainability. So I had some highlights, and I'm going to look at the new ANVR vision on sustainability that we are drafting at the moment and see where they interact and where they come together. So there you go. The overall research conclusion is sustainability is not a top priority for Dutch travelers, for Dutch vacationers. Not at all. Only 6% actually said it was something that they take into account as most important when it comes to their choices. It's all about, in the end, money that they use when it comes to the decision that they made. So 64% consider that one of the positive topics. When it's in orange, actually, it is something that I deem to be shocking. When it is in green, it is something that I deem to be positive and that we have to cling on when it comes to the next decades. So younger travelers and travelers with what we would call a higher education are the ones who consider sustainability and climate impact and climate relations towards travel as the most important. So still 40% more or less of Dutch vacationers think it's important to incorporate sustainability, and only 20% think it's not important, but it's not part of the choice when it comes to what type of holiday they would choose. The positive thing is that when it comes to climate change, that already 60% are somewhat concerned, and 40% say they take it into account when booking vacations. That's not what I see when it comes to people actually choosing, for example, the option to reduce the negative impact of their travel. That's only around 2 or 3% in practice. So there might be some value action gap between what they say that's important and the actual action that they're going to do. So as I said, CO2 offset isn't very popular. Then again, at least as it is some topic in Dutch politics, the majority of people think that the climate debate related to travel isn't nonsense. So they're not acting on it, but it's not nonsense. So there you go, not yet a priority. So we said, okay, when it comes to sustainability, we can't rely on the consumer driving change. The research it's just one research, 2,000 people polled, but they are not going to drive the change. That means that if we want to live up to all the goals that Laura has been telling us about, the change has to come from within travel industry. And we believe, as ANVR and also as ACTA, that travel agents and tour operators are specifically positioned to drive that change by the way that they advise their customers and by the way they talk with their entire supply chain. So when it comes to my new vision, and I'm developing it at the moment together with a scientific bureau, we're looking at 4 program lines. So it's still very new. I haven't even shared it with all of my members yet. So of course, I'm asking you to keep it completely among us. I will present it next month at the annual conference that we're having in Spain. But we're having 4 program lines. And the first one is for everyone in the entire supply chain, in the value chain, that we want and we need immediate emission reduction if we want to come up with the zero emission at 2050. And last night in the European Parliament, there was a new possible Dutch Euro Commissioner who said that he was already aiming at 90% in 2040. So the goal is high. When it comes to our traveler, we want to enhance the offerings that we have towards the customers to encourage them to make more sustainable choices. When it comes to our partners in the supply chain, we want transparent and socially responsible supply chains. And when it comes to our destinations, and we have beautiful stories already from Kim and Pascal regarding that, we want to contribute to ecologically and socially sustainable destinations. Those are the 4 program lines, those are the goals, and they will be cut into little pieces. What do ANVR members have to do, and what does ANVR have to do with the aim in 2030, 2050, and maybe we have to look at 2040 as well. So there you go. Very quickly, some of the things that we have been working on, Tim, and perfectly happy to answer some questions later on. It might be interesting to say that I actually wrote an article about the research. If anyone is interested, of course, I can share it via you, Tim, or people can add me on LinkedIn, search me by name, and I will send them to them directly.
That's great. Thank you very much, Frank. And you know, sometimes it's reassuring to get the reality, right? So if we've got some news which is making us, okay, there's no reason to be complacent here. And I think that observation that, you know, this is a demand-led industry, except that in this case, demand does not appear to be accelerating as fast as the requirement to change needs us to change. So it's one of those unusual, and perhaps we've never been here before. So as industry associations, so ETOA you've mentioned, also ETOA, we have to take a position and we have to support change, irrespective of the apparent market appetite in the long-term interests of the industry. So there's a very strong self-interest in taking that position. Absolutely. But it is something that is ahead of the market in some ways. And I think how the interaction between the destination and supply side and demand evolves is interesting. And I think we particularly see the role of the travel trade, which itself can influence consumers through explaining, you know, the positive impact of the choices they're making. They should play a serious part, and that's certainly part of the background to the event we're planning in late November. We've got 15-20 minutes left. I've got loads more questions than I had before I started, which is always a good sign. And I've prepared some questions for our panel just to make sure we unpack some of the issues. But I've got one question from an audience member, which I think is particularly relevant for Pascal, but I think there's others may jump in because it's a common question. So the sustainable 3 stages at the committed level, it's not a requirement to have certification, but once you're committed, you know, you're on that train and you're expected to get to level 2 and get some certification. So I think the general question that Christina from ETOA has sent us is, do we think that certification is the only way to show sustainability engagement by companies? You know, it is quite time-consuming and costly. So, you know, are there other ways that the destinations and suppliers can, you know, really provide substantiated evidence to their clients, consumers and B2B clients that they're doing the right thing without third-party certification? Or is third-party certification and perhaps something a bit more rational than I think there's now over 200 competing accreditation and certification systems, of which Switzerland recognized 90. It's a jungle out there. So do you have to be certified? Pascal, if you've got any initial reflections on that, please feel free to share. If anyone else would like to jump in, could you just do the old-fashioned raise your hand, panelists, and I'll invite you to speak. So Pascal, you start on that, please.
Thank you, Christina, for your question. So your first question is, how do companies participating in the program get visibility? Well, very, very simple two answers. One is, if a consumer goes on our website, myswitzerland.com, and they can now search for sustainable hotels, for instance. So B2C, the consumer, it really gives orientation to find you as a sustainable company. So that's one way. And B2B, so for the travel trade, we just had our big Switzerland Travel Mart 3 weeks ago, and their sustainable companies, you know, they get highlighted more as that. So we do it both. We do it for the consumer and the travel trade. And your second question, Well, yes, it is. It takes time, but we also really want to be thorough, that we don't just say it is sustainable without a credential or without it being recognized. So we really took a long time to build up this I mean, I gave you the 5 minutes summary, but we really spent a lot of time thinking of this program and how we can build it and how it is credible. So we believe that the way we have set it up now is good. It takes time, but we believe it helps us in the long run, and it also stands for quality. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Pascal. I can see Frank has his hand up, and I think there definitely are challenges around finding the time to do the certification. And note that Sustainable itself is not a certification system; it's a sort of recognition system and a database which is sort of helping people realize that there is a self-interest to joining, because you'll get found if you're within the system, that 2,300 plus companies that have got involved. Frank, you've got your hand up, and you might be interested in another question we've received as well, which is, how travelers will be educated for sustainable traveling. If you've got any reflections on that, as well as the certification question, please jump in.
Yes, when it comes to the certification question, I completely agree with Pascal. And if I might add to that, the European Commission is also working on the Green Claims Directive. So when it comes to the claims that companies make regarding the efforts that they're actually doing in the field of sustainability, you have to make sure that those claims are truthful and they hold up in time and etc. I think it would be extremely helpful, not if we have 3,000 different types of certification, Tim, but if we have a number of them that are actually recognized broadly, like, for example, Travel Life, on which we have been working within ANVR and within ETOA, or others. I'm not just looking at Travel Life. So that we know that if you at least say that you are Travel Life certified, or you have some other type of certification that has been vetted by the authorities, that the consumers know that it's actually right. Because when it comes to the second question, how are we going to educate the consumers? I think there are two things that are important. One, that the things that you say are actually truthful, and certification that has been vetted might help with that. And secondly, and I firmly believe in that, not everyone agrees with me, but I firmly believe in that, we have to be radically transparent about the impact of travel, both positive and negative. That's the only way that we're actually going to educate people, not by coming up with nice stories, but by being honest and transparent about the impact of travel. Not just negative, it's not just about CO2e, but also about the positive impact that travel has. Because let's not forget, travel brings so much, not just to the destination, but also to the travelers. It's so important. And when it comes to sustainability, mostly looking at the negative that comes with travel, but we can't forget all the positive that it brings, and we have to be honest and transparent about that. That's the only way, in my vision, that we can actually educate people.
Thanks, Frank. I think that's going to have an impact on advertising and pricing policies, as well as the green claims you suggest. We've got 10 minutes, 12 minutes to run. So, Lara, I can see your hands up, but I was going to come to you now as the sort of one of the prepared questions, because I'd like to give everyone a chance on the panel to speak again. So in addition to what you want to add to what we've just heard, perhaps I can bring it back to that sort of balance between regulation and other things. And one of the things we hear from our private sector members is that they might know that they need to move to a different place in the market, but commercially they're aware that if they sort of vacate a space, then other people might go into that space, which certainly in the short term is financially rewarding for them. So this feels like the Green Deal is about enabling and supporting transition across the entire economy, but there will also be regulatory coercion. So how do you see that balance between enabling and supporting, and the regulator giving you no choice? How do you see that balance playing out as we approach the Fit for 55 2030 goals? So Lara, any reflections?
Yeah, I was just, as the others were speaking, I was trying to figure out the sort of a matrix in my head between the necessity and the opportunity, and the supply and the demand side. So I think the first thing is obviously that this is in a way doing taking these actions is not a matter of choice, because when you look at the images that Frank shared, for example, it's not feasible to be a successful business in the conditions that we will be facing if we go on like this. Also, that also applies to the regulatory level. As I said, the sort of direction of travel has been set very clearly in policy and legislation, and that's coming up. So in a way, it's not a matter of preference or choice. We need to do something. We need to figure out what to do and how to do it. And indeed, in addition to the climate legislation as such, there's a lot of things coming up, like the green claims, like certification of carbon removals, that will have an impact on the industry, and in a way leveling up the playing field, and also lifting up the level of action, clarity and transparency across the industry and also across different sectors. So I think that's one element. Then this question of supply and demand is really interesting, and this question of the general awareness on climate change and how it translates or how it doesn't translate into action and real demand is really interesting. I think we see that in a lot of surveys, especially on topics like climate change, people know in principle, they are worried in principle, but when that actually goes into the real purchasing decisions and consumption choices, it's not that easy. Some behavioral research shows that awareness doesn't always lead to action. What leads to action is action. So I think where there is a sustainable offering, in a way that makes it easy for people to make that choice, and it makes it easier for them to make more of those choices. And once those choices are available, it also adds to the social contagion effect and the social norms and the social proof that this is working. And I think this is really the key to the consumer behavior. I think once the people start seeing what a more sustainable way of doing things looks like, and once it's easy for them to access that, to trust it based on the transparent and reliable information, and use it and enjoy it, and once they share that with people, once they have the good experience, I really think that this, action through action is the mechanism that has stronger potential than simply informing and raising awareness. And what I also think has a lot of power is the sort of peer, maybe not peer, a little bit of peer pressure and a little bit of peer support through initiatives like the Swiss initiative or other industry initiatives, where you actually work together as industry to figure out what it means and to do it together, because that also helps find more systemic solutions rather than just individual operators or individual companies going at it alone. And one last element I wanted to mention is how tourism is, as somebody said, I think in the example from Croatia, tourism is so closely linked to the local communities and to the local economics structures and networks, that I think that you can really make a big difference if you use your power in that context to create the conditions and to create the supply, and then to build on creating the demand through that. There are lots of networks and initiatives at the national level, but also at the European level, where we, for example, work with cities and regions. And I think all of them are very eager to work with the key sectors to make this transition happen in practice. So I would encourage you to find your role and your power in those structures.
Thank you very much, Lara. The time is running away with us, and your point about the broader benefits and the economic aspect is something I'd like to touch on with Pascal. One of the elements of sustainability that's easy to forget, particularly with the dominance of the climate emergency, is the economic sustainability that we're trying to develop through tourism. And year-round business is desirable, it's often available, but that often has some dependence on long-haul tourism, which is aviation dependent. So Pascal, just thinking about long-haul business, often that comes in the form of group tourism. How does that fit into Switzerland's plans? Briefly, if you could. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very good question. Not an easy one, Tim. What you say is right. We try to have year-round tourism and also geographically, balance. So also fall and spring, and not just the tourism highlights, but also regional distribution. And we need long-haul markets. I mean, if we look at our market mix, we have domestic tourism, we have European tourism, and we have long-haul markets. I believe that aviation does a lot. Can they do more? Probably. Can we all do more? Probably. But I think they are doing a lot. And to give you the example of Swiss International Airlines, they use this sustainable aviation fuel. They use shark skin technology. They do a lot. And the last point I would like to make is that group business really gives Swiss suppliers stability. They know that the group will come, so the hotel can hire staff, the hotel can hire food. If it's nice weather or if it's not such nice weather, they come. So group tourism in a quality way is still very important for us to provide year-round tourism and to provide jobs in these rural areas. That's my honest answer, Tim.
Well, thank you for that sort of very measured approach. Kim, you stressed the human side, you know, from anything from just being an attractive employer to this broader social impact outside there. And we've heard from others about there's a positive interaction between the development in supply side sustainability and the demand side. People are starting to ask for it, and some of the questions, we're not going to get to all of them, to you in the chat have been about how you monitor what's going on out there in your supply chain, just to, you know, monitor the effectiveness of changes and so forth. So that brings us back to that question of accreditation and like, how do we track what's going on? But the need to keep things quite simple and practical in business, you know, keep the necessary detail and rigor. But is there enough emphasis on social sustainability in all of these efforts to track what's going on? What do you think?
Well, coming at it from an incoming DMC perspective, I think we're perhaps a little bit more invested in that aspect, because we are operating and living in those destinations that the tourism is having an impact on. So when I'm commuting to work in the morning, I'm feeling the impact of the increased traffic on the roads for those guests that are arriving into the destination that day or commuting from one place to another. So for that reason, I personally feel, and we feel as a company also, that the importance of the social aspect of sustainability is on a par with the environmental, because what is a destination if it is inhabited by a community that is dissatisfied and doesn't have its basic needs met on a day-to-day basis, whether that's socially or economically. So it's really important that tourism is working for those residents as much as they are working for tourism. I'd like to see more of a focus placed on those social aspects of sustainability accreditation schemes. There's obviously a heavy focus on waste management, fuel consumption, and also on welfare, worker rights, which is perhaps less of an issue in Europe, and certainly in this part of Europe where we operate in the Adriatic region. So it's about going one step further for us, moving away from the basics around the societal aspects of the accreditation schemes that exist at the moment, and really pushing for the upskilling of a workforce and the benefits that brings, but also operating in a way that's sensitive to the communities that we operate in, and identifying the opportunities to help those communities to be nice places to live ultimately, and to foster those traditions and the cultures that make those places attractive destinations in the first place to those tourists. So we can do that through donations to schemes, but we can also do it through programs internally as a company that encourage employees to be involved in volunteer projects and the like, which have a wider impact on the community that the tourists won't necessarily see or feel.
Thank you very much, Kim. Sorry, my sound is slightly interrupted, so apologies if I trod on your toes there. Thank you very much for that, you know, much more sort of, you know, in-depth characterization of the benefit you're seeking. we're almost out of time. Frank, you're going to get the last word, which is going to be the easy question. So if looking ahead by 2030, most Dutch tourists are buying more sustainability focused product, what will have changed in the market? Get your crystal ball out.
There will be no air travel anymore, Tim. We're all going to Switzerland probably, which is by the research that we did, next to Norway in the eyes of the Dutch, the most sustainable destination. So Pascal apparently is doing a great job. So compliments to that. Now, 4 things, Tim, because we won't all be traveling sustainably in 2030, nor in 2050 for that matter. We're going to be transparent. We are going to offer alternatives that are less damaging or even better to consumers. That's the action on action that Laura was talking about. We're going to offer long haul only with more day trips, as Pascal was referring to. He wants the long haul to stay longer as well. We're going to have certification of policy, of practices of the supply chain. And in general, we're aiming at less CO2e per day per traveler. That's what we're aiming at. We're not going to be entirely sustainable, but we have made great steps in the right direction.
Thank you. And you know, I think that element of that pragmatic steps, you know, whether it's the offer changing, more transparency, making it easier to do the right thing, ultimately it's going to be harder to do damaging things. You know, that's the nature of progress. Ladies and gentlemen, we're out of time. I would like normally to give the panel a chance to share some final reflections, but I think all I can do this time is invite them to come back, because this conversation's been fascinating, and I think it's shown a really good range of aspects on sustainability and given us some actionable ways forward. As I said at the beginning, this is partly to warm up a debate which we hope turns into practical partnering up between supply side and buyers at the event we're running together with ETOA on November the 23rd. I'll put up a slide shortly. And before I do that, all that remains for me to do is to thank Laura, Pascal, Kim, Frank, and for all your time. And really, please come again. That was one of the more thought-provoking events we've had on this topic for a while. So thank you all very much indeed for your careful preparation and your insight today. And thank you to our audience for joining us, and for Sophie behind the scene. I'll just share that final slide. Hope to see you all soon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.